I'm going to take your baby and leave it in the mountains. I'm nursing my son right here, okay? Upon hearing my words, a sound of a smartphone dropping came from the other end of the phone line. It was Lisa, my sister-in-law. She must have checked the back seat, for a scream followed shortly after. Come to think of it, Lisa had always been tormenting me. Indeed, there were scenes at the wedding reception, constant spam emails, and a sudden visit right before I gave birth. But that scream marked the beginning of Lisa's end. My name is Michelle Anderson. I'm 27 and just recently gave birth and returned from the hospital. My husband Michael is completely smitten with our newborn son Alex, and he reluctantly went to work today. I get along well with my in-laws, and you could say we're living a happy married life. Except for Lisa, of course. From the very beginning, Lisa and I didn't get along well. Michael and I were classmates in middle school. Our school in a small town in Nebraska was peaceful with fewer students, and an atmosphere where bullying was unheard of. Michael's family runs a decent-sized construction company in the area, mostly working within the state, but occasionally getting orders from outside. It is well regarded. Their house was large, and our group of friends would often hang out or study there. Michael's mom was always welcoming. They had a part-time helper who kept the house tidy, and during her breaks she would serve us snacks and drinks. One summer day while working on homework, we heard unfamiliar heavy footsteps. Wondering who it could be, we were soon hit with an overpowering scent of perfume. "Mikey, I'm back!" A flamboyant, large woman called his name and literally jumped on him. He pushed her away, exclaiming, "Sis, we're studying here, okay?" "Oh, come on, Mikey. It's not nice to treat your sister like that after such a long time," she pouted. "I told you we're studying. We have exams coming up." Yeah, whatever." She then scanned our group, pausing to look at each one of us. While she was doing that, he went to call his mom. She seemed to be sizing each of us up. When her gaze met mine, she frowned deeply. "Oh, why is she here?" No one really understood what she meant. She gestured towards some of the others and said, "You're okay, and so are you." She pointed at me. "Don't get close to my Mikey. He seems so dull and gloomy." I was stunned, never having been spoken to like that before. My friends quickly jumped to my defense, saying things like, "She's not dull or gloomy, she's just quiet and reserved. She always helps us with homework. Boy, she's really smart. What's that got to do with anything?" Being around her might make Mikey gloomy too. She waved her hands dismissively at me. She was wearing a dress with too many frills and ribbons for a summer day. And she was quite imposing, especially compared to us middle schoolers. "I'm leaving." I didn't listen to my friend's pleas to stay and hurriedly left, hearing Lisa's amused laughter behind me. That day I got an apology call from Michael. "I'm sorry for what Lisa did. She's always been like that, ever since we were kids." "Oh really? I don't know why she said those things to you." "It's okay. It's not your fault, Michael." But since that incident, every time someone mentioned going to his house, I hesitated. Time flew, we graduated, and went to different high schools. Our group drifted apart, and I lost touch with Michael. I bumped into him again when I moved to New York for college. After the orientation, as I was wandering through clubs trying to decide which to join, someone suddenly grabbed my arm. "Is that you, Michelle? Michael, is that you?" It seemed too good to be true, but Michael was attending the same college and was in the same department as me. We had different majors, but we ended up taking many of the same classes. We started hanging out a lot. Those 4 years deepened our bond. Then came job hunting. Neither of us ended up going back to our hometowns. Michael was expected to take over his family's business, so I was surprised when I heard he wasn't returning. Then he told me, "You know, I never told you this, but I ran away from Lisa." I was shocked to hear this from him, who was looking so serious. "What do you mean?" "When I started high school, Lisa got a job at a local company through my dad's connections. She had always wanted to stay in New York and have fun, but she couldn't find a job anywhere else." Remembering the loud and overpowering presence of Lisa, I thought, so that's what happened. That's why I wanted to find a job and get married here. "Is that okay with you?" "What do you mean by okay?" "You're the only one I want to be with." I couldn't help but hug Michael tightly. 3 years later, He proposed, and we decided to get married. When we went to his family home to introduce ourselves, Lisa was waiting for us. She looked at me and said, "What are you doing here? You're that girl from back then?" I thought I'd never see you again after I threatened you that day. I remember being oddly calm and surprised she remembered that after 10 years. Then at our wedding, Lisa caused a scene. "Why can't I wear the dress I like?" she exclaimed. She arrived in a huge, fluffy white dress that made her look like a snowman. She arrived at the last moment, so we knew she did it on purpose. There was no time to change her outfit, and she wouldn't have fit into a backup dress anyway. She had always been on the larger side, and she seemed even bigger now. Then at the reception, she really made a scene. After drinking way too much, she stumbled up during Michael's boss's speech saying, "You don't have to hide that thin hair of yours," and laughingly took off his wig. I'll never forget the look on Michael's face. Everyone knows not to mention things like that, especially in public. Michael immediately ran over and apologized profusely. Our in-laws quickly grabbed Lisa from both sides and took her out. After the reception, we demanded an apology from Lisa. But she just sat there, crossed her legs, turned her head away and said, "I will never accept your marriage. Why on earth is Michael with someone like you? Enough is enough, Lisa. You always mess with my friends and partners. Do you know why I left our hometown? It was because of you, Mikey." Lisa turned to look at Michael for the first time. "Ew, why the scary look? Oh right, it must be because of her. Of course. Ew, she's just the type to sit in the corner of the classroom and quietly read books." She must have been talking behind my back to Mikey. I'm sure of it. It was my decision not to introduce you to Michelle for so long. Everything falls apart when you're around. The reason I didn't make the varsity baseball team in high school was my own lack of skill. Yet you still went to confront the coach. And after that, I couldn't stay on the team. Do you remember that? But that's not true. It's awful that the coach doesn't recognize Michael's talents. You are meant to shine. I've always supported you in that way. My father-in-law sighed as he looked at Lisa, who was shouting hysterically. However, after a while he got up, grabbed your hand and said, "Lisa, get ready quickly. We're giving up the room you're living in now." "What are you talking about? Just now, there was a call from your company. That person has been an important contact of yours, having been associated with your company's deputy director for a long time." "What?" Lisa's astonished voice echoed throughout the room. "So you were rude to him? You know what that means, right?" He was quite angry, but he said he'll continue doing business with the company in exchange for firing you. Firing you was a difficult decision. I allowed you to live on your own because you claimed to be working, but that arrangement is now over. We will not let you leave the house so easily. Instead, we will put you to work hard here." My father-in-law's stern voice brought relief to Michelle and Michael. "You two can live your lives without any worries. Don't concern yourselves with the company. Even if you are going to take over, it is still a long way off," their parents reassured them. However, that was not the end of it. Every day my phone received harassing calls and a barrage of emails. When I checked my messages during my break at work, I saw a list of comments like, "Because of you, Mikey won't come back to his hometown. Mikey is mine. He should always be at home with me. You are not fit to be Mikey's wife. Persuade Mikey to come back." I seriously considered blocking her number, but I was overwhelmed by the fear that she might show up at my door if I did. Around that time, I often felt sick. So, I let the calls go to voicemail and ignored the texts. Then, I found out I was pregnant. The persistent nausea made sense. When I informed both my parents and Michael's parents, both families immediately congratulated us. "So where is Lisa?" I was asked. "She's out right now." "Don't worry. I plan on keeping it from her as long as possible." Over the phone, I could hear the weariness in Michael's mother's voice. "Thank you. How is Lisa doing?" "Well, she still hasn't returned. Every day after work, she's out somewhere in her car." "How is the work at your husband's company?" Michael's mother sighed deeply. "It's a mess. Lisa doesn't even try to learn the basics of her job, and it seems she can't." I was shocked to hear that. "And lately she keeps saying that she was deeply hurt by what was said back then. She became depressed and doesn't want to go to work. Even when I tell her to see a doctor to note, she says she's too depressed to move. Although I send her off, I've heard she often skips work without notice. But she drives around a lot, right? Yes, she's unpredictable, but I'll make sure she doesn't come bothering you during your crucial time. Thanks to Michael's mother, I didn't face any surprise visits from Lisa while I was home. However, I continued to receive a barrage of emails from her. When are you gonna divorce? You should leave. You're just holding Mikey back. This child looks just like Mikey's first love, completely different from you. Looks like me, actually. The messages were repetitive and draining. I had another issue too. The morning sickness hit me early and hard. Michael was concerned and suggested I take an early leave from work and return to my parents' house. But isn't my parents' place in the same school district as yours? I fear Lisa might show up any day. Michael pondered over this and then called his father. He replied, "All right, since Lisa can't seem to hold a job anyways, I'll force her to join me on a long-term project." Is it far this time? It's nearby but on an island, he added. So, she can't return without my permission. It was reassuring to hear that. I expressed my gratitude to Michael's parents and decided to return to my parents' house. Upon visiting Michael's family home, both my father-in-law and Lisa were out, making the large house seem lonely. "It's okay. We're relieved without her around," Michael's father said. It seemed they were tired of their daily life with Lisa. However, close to my delivery date, a shocking event took place. "Michelle? Why are you here?" Lisa was banging loudly on my parents' door. At that time, my mother had gone out shopping. I checked all the windows to make sure they were locked. Everything was sealed tight. As long as I didn't go out, I'd be fine. But then there was a loud crashing noise. Through the living room curtains, I could see a figure. It was Lisa. She was holding a metal baseball bat and stomped her way into the house, shoes on. "There you are. I knew you were home, Michelle." I grabbed my phone and made my way to the front door. Lisa seemed to have predicted my move as she quickly closed in on me. I knew I was in danger and tried to rush upstairs. But at that moment I felt a terrible blow to my back. Lisa had struck me right in the middle of my back with the baseball bat she held. "Ouch!" I exclaimed, but I couldn't just stand there. I choked on the impact, feeling a rising sensation from my stomach, almost like nausea. Still clutching my belly, I began to climb the familiar stairs, trying to move as swiftly as I could. "Wait up!" Lisa shouted at the top of her lungs. No way, I was waiting, I thought to myself. My destination was the room on the second floor I'd used before going to college. I've been living on the first floor since I came back home, so I don't usually use it. But in there I can lock the door from the inside. Lisa, groaning, followed with heavy steps, laboriously making her way up our winding staircase. She paused midway, catching her breath. I took this chance and darted into my room. I locked the door and dragged a table in front of it for extra security. Relief flooded me, and I slumped to the floor. That's when I noticed the carpet was damp. "Oh no, not now." On the other side of the door, Lisa had caught up. She was pounding on the door with the bat. Each thud was heavy, a testament to her strength, and random thoughts raced through my head. Then, "Hey, what the hell?" I heard my mom's voice from outside the window. She's back, I thought, relieved. But I couldn't let her in. It's too dangerous. I called my mom on my cell. "Michelle, are you okay?" "This shattered window." "Mom, call 911. Get an ambulance and the police." "You mean the police, but an ambulance?" "Don't tell me." "Yes, that's right, my water broke. But I'm trapped upstairs." "Hurry, but don't let Lisa see you. She's got a bat." I managed to say this before I fainted from the stress. When I came to, everything seemed to be over. I felt strange and my head was foggy. "Michelle, thank God you're awake." A familiar voice. Michael was by my bed. What happened? Then it hit me. My stomach. "Michelle, when they brought you in, things were looking dire. They had to perform an emergency C-section." "My baby? Where's my baby?" "He's fine. A healthy baby boy." "Thank you. We'll go see him together later." I took a deep breath of relief. "Ouch, you can't do that. The doctor said you have a pretty bad fracture." I shivered. Was it when Lisa hit me? Did the bat strike my ribs? Thank God it wasn't the baby. I truly felt that from the bottom of my heart. Michael then apologized. I'm sorry. Huh? Why are you apologizing? That baseball bat Lisa brought over was in my room. Oh, I remembered. It was the bat Michael had once used for the baseball team he had to quit midway. I shouldn't have left it where she could find it. It's not your fault. If she hadn't found your bat, she probably would have taken Dad's golf club. That's when it hit me. What happened to Lisa? Well, she was caught red-handed breaking the windows of your family home. I thought Lisa was supposed to be on a work trip to the island. It seems she overheard a phone conversation between my father and me. About my pregnancy? Yeah. She must have figured out the timing of when she was brought to the island for work and lost her cool. We'll need to cool things down for a while. I felt relieved after hearing that. The next day after we were discharged from the hospital, my son Alex was as lively as ever, and he was now breastfeeding. I was gently stroking Alex's back when my smartphone rang. It was Michelle. I thought about ignoring it, but the call continued longer than I expected. However, after the 40th ring, I decided to answer. Hello? Finally! Why did you take so long? How long did you plan to make me wait? Another noise overlapped with her voice. Stop that. It's so loud. Hey Lisa, do you have a baby with you? What I heard next was indeed the voice of a baby. That's right. I took your son, but he's so noisy, crying non-stop. I was confused. Why would there be a baby there? Ugh. I thought I'd take him home and raise him my way, but he's so loud. I quickly reached for the home phone. Hello, is this Michael's mom? Why, what's up? Is Alex okay? Yes, but isn't that Alex crying? Lisa was still making a racket in the background. It seems my mother-in-law heard the noise. Whispering, I asked, do you know where Lisa is right now? Huh? She's been quiet since the police handed her over. She just called, and it sounds like she has a baby with her. My mother-in-law gasped in shock. There were some noises, probably her checking if Lisa's car was around. I put the home phone near my smartphone. You checked the hospital to see if your son was there, didn't you? Tough luck, he's right here with me. So darn loud. Oh, I got an idea. Lisa, what have you been saying all this time? With a pleased look as if she had come up with something, I asked her with a sinking feeling. I'm going to leave your baby out in the mountains. But Alex is here with me, breastfeeding. What? The next moment, a scream echoed from the other end. Why, Alex? I gently poked Alex's cheek. He let out a cheerful laugh. Lisa must have heard that. Wait, then whose baby do I have here? What don't you get? Wasn't your son still in the hospital? My son and I have been discharged and are at home. There was a loud thud followed by the sound of a baby crying even louder and Lisa screaming. She must have realized she kidnapped someone else's baby. I grabbed the home phone. Did you hear that? Something serious has happened. Yes. I'm gonna call the hospital right now. You stayed put. The call ended. What a reliable woman. Indeed, I was not in a position to move right now. Given the constant need for breastfeeding, I couldn't leave my son's side. For the time being, I decided to focus all my energy on soothing my son, who started crying due to the noise coming from the other side of the smartphone. Later, I was informed that Lisa's car was found parked by the seaside road. Lisa was found dazed inside the car. The baby placed in the car seat in the back was safely retrieved. He was mildly dehydrated and was sternly reprimanded by the paramedics. Needless to say, his parents were furious with Lisa. This wasn't just a family squabble like breaking a window. It was a kidnapping involving someone else's child. The parents of the kidnapped baby were also mildly dehydrated and furious, saying our child was almost killed. We won't let this slide. They clearly showed an attitude of not forgiving Lisa tomorrow. My father-in-law, who rushed back in a hurry, reportedly told the police, "There's no handling this at home anymore." I thought I was keeping an eye on things, to make sure Michelle and others weren't inconvenienced. But this is the last straw. I'm cutting ties with you for good. Lisa, the one being told this, seemed initially clueless about what he was talking about. Then, the moment she understood, she reportedly let out a loud scream. But why someone else's child? The police gave the answer to the in-laws. Firstly, Lisa had been quiet at the in-laws' house for a while. But it seems that was to plot revenge against me for being detained over the matter of breaking the glass at her family home. She learned about my upcoming discharge from overhearing a conversation between her parents and planned to kidnap my son before that. However, Lisa missed the exact discharge date. My release from the hospital had been brought forward. Both my son and I were in good enough health to be discharged, and suddenly there was a need for our bed. I gladly agreed to the early release. Lisa came to the hospital after I had already been discharged. She apparently sneaked into a patient room where another mother and child with the same last name as ours were staying and took the child when she sensed I wasn't there. Apparently, with her large build and wearing a sling carrying a baby, she just looked like any other patient being discharged. The bassinet was one of the items that my mother-in-law had hurriedly bought in preparation for my baby, including a crib and other things. She quickly sneaked into the house and while looking for her car keys, spotted it and thought it was just perfect to take. The baby's mother, who happened to be in the bathroom, and the hospital were in an uproar. The situation became clear thanks to a call from my mother-in-law, and both the police and ambulances were dispatched. The police also came to our house and checked the call history. I checked the call history on my smartphone and found out that they were able to pinpoint Lisa's location. As a result, Lisa is going to be in jail for a while, which she deserves. She will face a criminal trial, and lawyers have been coming to ask for testimonies that could help her, but the in-laws have firmly declined to support or help her in any way. Finally, my smartphone went silent, and we breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that peaceful days are finally upon us. It seems like the day when Michael will return to take over the family home, and we can all live happily together, is getting closer. Do you have a moment? It's about your mother-in-law. The doctor, who had pulled on my arm, looked at me with a deeply concerned expression. It has been 10 years since my mother-in-law became wheelchair-bound, and she regularly goes to the hospital for checkups and physical therapy. That day, she was at the hospital for the same reason, undergoing tests. I was waiting for her in the waiting room before her therapy session when the doctor grabbed my arm. "I'm gonna speak with her primary doctor about this," he said. I gently released my arm from his grip. The doctor standing in front of me was a man, but my mother-in-law's primary doctor was a woman. I hadn't heard of any change in her primary care doctor, so I was puzzled as to why a doctor who wasn't her primary would want to talk about my mother-in-law. Seeing the suspicion in my eyes, the male doctor hastily grabbed my hands. "There's something that neither your mother-in-law nor her primary doctor should hear. That's why I only want to tell you." "Huh?" I took a step towards the doctor, who was looking at me with a grave expression. "My name is Julie. I'm a 37-year-old office worker. I work at a small and medium-sized company, but for some reason I've been working remotely lately. When I was a child, my mother left home, and I was raised in a single-parent family. My father always said that my mother was a no-good woman who ran off with a younger man. He advised me to never meet her. All I knew was that her name was Yvonne, and she was a spendthrift, treating me like a nuisance, and my father like a slave. Eventually my parents divorced, and thanks to my father working day and night, I was able to go to college and find a job, although not at a big firm. Even though I didn't have a mother, I never felt lonely because of all the love my father gave me. After starting work, I've lived alone and become independent. 14 years ago, I married Mike. Mike's father had passed away 2 years before our wedding, and his mother, who was living alone, warmly welcomed me into their family, treating me like her own daughter. For years into our marriage, my mother-in-law was involved in a car accident. After a car accident, my mother-in-law became wheelchair-bound. She used to be a lively and cheerful woman, but since the accident, her smiles have disappeared and she has become very withdrawn. It must be difficult for her to accept her limited mobility. Despite having various caregivers over the years, none of them seemed to be a good match, and her condition seemed to deteriorate. She kept contacting us, expressing her loneliness and asking us to come back, even if it was just for a short while. Concerned, my husband and I decided to move back into his family home to take care of her. We took a week off, using our paid time off to dedicate to her care, and then planned to return to our jobs once she was feeling better. When we visited, my mother-in-law seemed relieved. After a few days, she began to smile again. However, when we told her that we needed to go back to work, her demeanor completely changed. She begged us not to leave, saying, "Please, both of you, don't leave. Don't leave me alone," crying out and becoming nearly hysterical. I tried to calm her down, explaining that my husband needed to return to his job, but I promised to talk to my company and see if I could stay a bit longer. I reassured her that I would come back as often as I could and asked her to hang in there for me. I also asked my sister Julie if she could stay and help, and my husband Mike to come back as soon as he could. After the loss of her husband, my mother-in-law had been alone for a long time. When we as a couple came to visit, she was overjoyed. However, our sudden notification of leaving likely brought on feelings of anxiety and confusion. I could tell that her weakened state over the past week had made her more fearful of facing her loneliness. After discussing with my company, I decided to switch to remote work and work from home for a short time while taking care of my mother-in-law. But ever since then, she hated being alone. Even when I worked from home, she would always cling to me. No matter how close we were, I couldn't let her be seen by my coworkers. Even if I asked her to leave the room, she would always wait somewhere she could see me. It felt like I was being watched, and I began to resent it. On the other hand, my husband Mike would come home on weekends and even take some days off during the week to help with her care. Although she continued physical therapy, there was no improvement in her condition, which meant I couldn't return to the office. Our personal lives were dominated by her care, leaving no time for just the two of us. This year marks the 10th year of this lifestyle. She turned 65. With each passing year, her dependency on us grew. My husband, unable to bear it, reduced his visits year by year. Even if I stepped out for just a few minutes, my mother-in-law would freak out, yelling, and she would say, "Take me with you." Calming her down took ages, and I couldn't go back to our own home. But I couldn't abandon the woman who welcomed me from a single-parent household without any judgment or prejudice. Then one day, everything changed. On this day, my mother-in-law had a routine checkup. As always, I accompanied her to the hospital. My mother-in-law's doctor was a woman in her 30s named Mia. She had been taking care of my mother-in-law for 10 years, and I trusted her completely. After my mother-in-law went into the examination room, I stepped outside to take a work call. When I returned about 15 minutes later, a young male doctor stopped me. "Excuse me, you're Sally's daughter, right?" Sally is my mother-in-law's first name. The doctor who called out using my mother-in-law's name was a male doctor, a bit younger than me. It was Ryan, and he recently transferred to this hospital. He mentioned that he has worked in the same department as Dr. Mia, who has been in charge of my mother-in-law. Taken aback, I replied, "Yes, actually I'm her daughter-in-law." "But what's going on?" He apologized for the sudden approach and asked if I had a moment to discuss something about my mother-in-law. I agreed, and Dr. Ryan looked relieved and led me to a small private room. It was a consultation room not too far from the examination rooms. Dr. Ryan motioned for me to sit in a chair on the side, and once I settled in, he took a seat across a small desk, looking directly into my eyes. "You're currently living with Sally at her house to take care of her, right?" I replied, "Oh yes, that's right." I explained that for the past 10 years, I had been working from my mother-in-law's home while caring for her. I hardly had time to hang out with friends, let alone have some alone time with my husband. Because of my mother-in-law's increased dependency, my husband started avoiding coming home. I lost almost all of my personal time, so I couldn't really discuss the care of my mother-in-law with anyone else. Dr. Ryan nodded, listening intently, which made me spill all the frustrations I had been feeling. "Oh, I'm so sorry for going on and on like this." He replied, "It's completely all right. Anyway, wow, 10 years. He said that with a gentle smile, and then his face grew thoughtful. Moments later, Dr. Ryan looked at me with a serious expression and started talking. However, what reached my ears wasn't Dr. Ryan's words, but a scream from my mother-in-law. In a panic, both Dr. Ryan and I rushed to the examination room where my mother-in-law was, and what we saw was unthinkable. I was at a loss for words. Dr. Ryan shook his head and he said, "You should leave that house ASAP. Get away from your mother-in-law." His words left me speechless. Suppressing the anger that welled up inside me, I nodded to Dr. Ryan. Instead of going to my mother-in-law, I headed straight to the police. Though skeptical, they promised to send someone to investigate, so I hurriedly packed up my things from the house. The image of what I had seen at the hospital kept replaying in my mind. An hour or so later, as I was still packing, I called my husband to explain everything. Throughout, I kept receiving countless calls and messages from my mother-in-law. She must have been worried, since I didn't show up even after her treatments. But I continued to ignore her non-stop calls and messages until I mostly finished packing. In the evening, my husband and the police arrived, and that's when I finally answered a call from my mother-in-law. "Julie, where are you? I've called so many times. Why aren't you picking up?" As soon as the call connected, my mother-in-law yelled with fury. Normally I would apologize immediately, but this time with a firm attitude, I said, "I'm at home. Why did you leave me behind and go home first? How could you do that?" My mother-in-law continued to rant and rave. Sighing, I said, "Hey, I realized I don't need to live with you anymore, so I'm going back to the house where my husband is." I told my mother-in-law firmly, "Well, Julie, what on earth are you thinking? How do you expect me to live without you? How am I supposed to get back from the hospital? You probably know best, right? Why don't you just walk back home? After all, your legs are fine, so you don't need a wheelchair or care, right?" When I continued like that, my mother-in-law let out a short scream. I could picture her being extremely upset. "You know I found out everything you've been hiding." I then relayed to my mother-in-law what Dr. Ryan had told me and what I had personally witnessed. According to Dr. Ryan, recent tests showed that there were no issues with the muscles or nerves in my mother-in-law's body. That's when he thought it might be all in her head. He thought that maybe my mother-in-law genuinely believed she couldn't walk, and that belief was what was actually preventing her from walking. Apparently, the power of such beliefs can be incredibly strong, and he was considering not only physical therapy for her legs, but also psychological care. That's why he thought to include me, as family, in the care plan and had called me over. But it turned out even that wasn't necessary. While I was speaking with Dr. Ryan, I heard a woman scream from the examination room. Was that my mother-in-law? Dr. Ryan and I exchanged glances and quickly went to check the room. The exam room door had a window, and through it, we saw my mother-in-law making gestures as if swatting away an insect. Indeed, the scream had been my mother-in-law's, but why would there be a bug in the exam room? As it turned out, my mother-in-law had mistaken dust for a bug. We saw her picking up the motionless dust and walking over to the trash can to throw it away. Incredibly, my mother-in-law walked without the need for a wheelchair or cane, moving with light steps. I stared in shock as Dr. Ryan pushed me to the corner of the hallway. Peeking into the examination room, we noticed that my mother-in-law didn't seem to be aware of us. She calmly returned to her wheelchair as if nothing had happened. Just then, Dr. Mia came back into the room and slowly extended her hand to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, seemingly in response, placed a brown envelope in her hand. Dr. Mia discreetly slipped the envelope into her skirt pocket, and acting as if nothing unusual had transpired, pushed my mother-in-law's wheelchair towards the facility for physical therapy. "Julie, are you okay?" I was so stunned by the series of events that I could only stand frozen until Dr. Ryan spoke softly to me. It wasn't that she couldn't walk, or even that she believed she couldn't. She was pretending to be immobile. Trembling, I felt Dr. Ryan's hand on my shoulder, shaking his head gently. He advised me to leave my in-laws' house immediately, and I quickly packed to escape from my mother-in-law. Throughout my story, my mother-in-law remained silent. Finally, with a sigh audible over the phone, she began to speak, perhaps realizing she couldn't evade the truth any longer. "It's true that I became wheelchair-bound after a car accident, and it's true that I was injured seriously enough to need care. But thanks to the treatments, about 5 years after the accident, I could walk with the aid of a cane." My husband and I, listening over the speaker, were stunned to think she had recovered in just 5 years. What then was the purpose of the 12 years we had spent caring for her? She was like, "I feared that once you both found out I could walk, you'd leave my side, Julie, Mike." I couldn't bear that thought. We knew she loved us dearly from her day-to-day attitude. She had us take care of her to ensure we wouldn't leave. Julie, I truly love you like my own daughter. After Mike moved out and my husband passed away, I felt so lonely. My mother-in-law repeatedly told us, but our hearts remained unmoved. We knew that, Mom, Mike. But the way you went about it was wrong. We can't be by your side any longer. Sorry. Look, I've been taking care of you for the past 10 years while working. My colleagues have experienced promotions, marriages, and childbirth. Because of your care, I couldn't have a child of my own. I had almost given up on having kids. But now, I feel like the past 10 years have been in vain. Why did you deceive us to the point of having us care for you? We would have visited you during our time off. Why did it have to be this way? I didn't mean to blame her, but as the words poured out, so did my tears. With my husband supporting me, I told my mother-in-law that I didn't intend to care for her anymore. We would leave her house today and never contact her again. My mother-in-law protested and grew hysterical, but we hung up. The police, after understanding the details, said they would begin an investigation. 2 months later, after moving, I was at a hospital with my husband. When we were about to leave after finishing our doctor's appointment, a familiar person rushed over to us. It was Dr. Mia, who was supposed to be my mother-in-law's doctor. We remembered her with fuller cheeks, but she looked gaunt and fatigue emanated from her entire being. Wondering why she was at this hospital, we couldn't decline her as she approached with a desperate look, so we reluctantly listened to what she had to say. Turns out, Dr. Mia knew all along that my mother-in-law's leg was healed and she had accepted money from her to give her a disability diagnosis. She mentioned the money was also in the envelope she received from my mother-in-law that day. Apparently, due to a complaint by Dr. Ryan recently, the hospital found out and she was fired immediately. Furthermore, since she had continuously forged medical certificates, she is likely going to be arrested for fabricating medical records, and it is almost certain that her medical license will be revoked. But she insisted that she didn't do anything wrong. Incredibly, Dr. Mia claimed that the money wasn't an appreciation gift from my mother-in-law, but hush money from my husband and me. She alleged we plotted to scam disability pension by making my mother-in-law disabled, and she had written the necessary documents reluctantly after we threatened her and paid her off. But there was no evidence of any of this. It was Dr. Mia who extended her hand to my mother-in-law that day. I couldn't believe that she put all the blame on us just because she was in trouble, about to be arrested. What are you talking about? We haven't done anything like that. No, that's the truth. I'm going to tell the police everything. Dr. Mia, her eyes red with rage, shouted, making us turn pale. While her claims had no evidence, it would also be tough for us to prove we had nothing to do with her. Terrified at the thought of being arrested, at the thought of being demanded to prove our innocence, a devil's proof, my husband and I were on the verge of tears when a woman approached us. She stood between Dr. Mia and us, shielding us. Aren't you the head doctor here? I asked urgently. I need to talk to you. Upon seeing the woman, Dr. Mia turned deathly pale. She quickly put on a forced smile and approached the woman, trying to butter her up. Do you need something from my daughter? I asked, referring to the woman as my mother. The woman who was glaring at Dr. Mia was actually Yvonne, my mother. Yes, my mother, whom I was separated from as a child due to her divorce, was a doctor. After divorcing my father, she quickly rose through the ranks and became the head of a major university hospital. She was also one of the people who agreed to revoke Dr. Mia's medical license when she found out about her misdeeds. Oh, you're related, I exclaimed. In that case, could you please hear me out? I was only threatened by them and wrote the diagnosis reluctantly. As a mother, you wouldn't want your daughter to be a criminal, right? Can't you help me out? Dr. Mia begged, trying to invoke my mother's sympathy. But my mother shook her head, saying, "Don't mess with me." She then turned to Dr. Mia and said, "You and Sally have been deceiving the hospital and the authorities for 10 years, keeping my daughters confined at home. Sally kept them at home because she was afraid to be alone. You, on the other hand, funded your debts from your nightlife with Sally's disability benefits. You are frauds and you need to face appropriate punishment and make amends. Dr. Mia's plea was abruptly dismissed. No way, absolutely not, my mother declared. Realizing there was nothing she could do, Dr. Mia slumped to the ground in despair. Whispers and stares from those around us focused on her, and we couldn't help but watch with indescribable feelings. Suddenly, a strong pull came from behind. I was startled and turned around to find, astonishingly, my mother-in-law standing firmly beside my father. "You!" my father shouted angrily at my mother. "What have you done to Julie?" "Dad, why are you here?" I asked, surprised to see him. "And why with my mother-in-law?" "When I heard that Sally was looking for Julie, I wanted to help," my father explained. "You moved to a new place without telling me. I thought I would meet you if I followed Dr. Mia." The reason I hadn't told my father our whereabouts was not just because of the family connection between my mother-in-law and him. Ever since my mother-in-law had a car accident, I had asked my father to look after her when I was out for work. It was during those times that they became close and started dating secretly, behind our backs. I had found out about this last year when I happened to see them together. I happened to see my father and my mother-in-law talking closely at my in-laws' house on a few occasions after returning from an outing. I suspected their relationship, and hence didn't inform my father when we moved. The very sight of them together now sent shivers down my spine. "Give Julie back! I won't let you take her away. Julie, Mike, let's go home." My father, yelling at my mother, had an intensity I'd never seen before. Brushing off my father's grip, I said, "Stop it. I know all the stories you told me about Mom are lies." My father's face went pale at my shout. It turned out that since the divorce he had been feeding me lies about my mother, to make sure I didn't want to meet her. The stories about her treating him like a slave or leaving him for a younger man were all false. My mother, an accomplished doctor, always had a busy schedule. My father knew this when they married. But after I started daycare, his attitude shifted drastically. He blamed her for our lack of family vacations and decided to divorce her, claiming she wasn't a good mother. And on my 4th birthday, my father suddenly took me and left home. In reality, it was my father who left, not my mother. Following the divorce settlement, even though my mother had a decent income, she couldn't guarantee time for raising me. So my father was nominated to live with me. However, my mother had been sending a substantial amount in child support every month. I didn't know this until I met my mother. Even after becoming a single parent, my father made sure I didn't want to see my mother by portraying her in a negative light with false stories. It seemed that my mother wanted to see me, but most of the time she was overseas for trainings or researches. She even kept sending me letters from overseas, but my father kept refusing and hiding the letters. There were times when it seemed they might meet, but something always came up. Either my mother got an emergency call at the hospital, or my father would come up with an excuse to cancel at the last minute. I had been told since I was young that my mother couldn't be reached, or that no one knew where she was. It turned out that was a lie. The reason my father could afford to travel once every 2 months and pay for my high school and college tuition was thanks to the child support money from my mother. Our comfortable life was all thanks to my mother. So the story of my father working late nights was also a sham. To make it seem like he was struggling with parenting, he'd work a regular 9-to-5 job, then spend the night somewhere, coming home only in the early morning. When my father yelled and asked for proof, my mother calmly showed him a mobile bank app. She said, "This is how much I've transferred to you over the years for Julie, and your company unusually has strict policies against second jobs. So it was impossible. I can confirm with them if you'd like." My father crumbled and my mother-in-law tried to comfort him. Seeing my father like this made me realize that I had been lied to my entire life. While the truth was shocking, I felt more anger than anything else. I was like, "Thanks for everything, Dad, but it's time to say goodbye," saying that coldly. My father clung to me, and my mother-in-law was like, "Julie, your dad did everything he thought was best for you." "No, he did it for himself. You lied about struggling as a single parent using the money from my mom. And you lied to my husband and me trying to bind us to your home. Both of you are a perfect match for your lies. Please stay away from us and my mother." With no excuses left, my father and my mother-in-law were speechless. Ignoring their stunned faces, we left the hospital with my mother. Later, Dr. Mia was arrested and lost her medical license. She had forged medical documents multiple times and was sentenced to imprisonment. Additionally, the hospital she worked for is suing her for defamation. My mother-in-law had bribed a doctor for a fake diagnosis, leading to her having to pay back all the pension money she received with interest. She's also facing fraud charges as informed by the police. Mike says he's cut ties with her, so he's not bothered about her future. I'm trying not to care either. As for me, I realized I had been somewhat dependent on my mother-in-law. Feeling betrayed sent me into a mental spiral, so I've been seeing a therapist at the hospital where my mother works. Regarding my reunion with my mother, when I was getting a referral at my previous hospital, the doctor's name I was referred to was the same as my mother's. To my surprise, it was actually her. My mother was skeptical when she saw a patient named me, but during the consultation, she realized it was me. Our reunion can only be described as miraculous. I can't be treated by my mother due to hospital rules, but she supports me from behind the scenes. I've been back to my job at the office while still attending therapy. When visiting Dr. Ryan, who informed me of the truth about my mother-in-law, I heard that he and my husband were old high school buddies. We now often hang out, with Ryan visiting our place, and everything feels like old times. It may be hard for me to forget how I was manipulated by my mother-in-law and my father, but my husband, my mother, and Dr. Ryan always encouraged me to take things easy and do what I want. Thanks to them, I'm planning trips with my friends or going to cafes by myself. My first impression upon seeing my sister-in-law for the first time was that she was extremely charming. A charming person with striking features. Nice to meet you, my name is Catherine. I'm here to introduce myself. However, just when I thought I would get along with her, that feeling quickly faded in the next moment. Who is this older woman? Is she my brother's wife's mother? The atmosphere became tense when my sister-in-law not only interrupted my greeting, but also referred to me as an old lady. From that day on, my days became hellish. My name is Catherine Johnson. I am just an ordinary 30-year-old housewife. 4 years ago, I was a career woman, completely dedicated to my job. Not to boast, but I was quite popular in the office. I achieved many accomplishments and was admired by my subordinates, superiors, and clients alike. My husband Bob was one of them. Bob and I would often meet since we dealt with each other's companies. Our friendship began at a party with Bob's company when he initiated a conversation with me. It seems my reputation had reached Bob's company as well. According to Bob, he wanted to see for himself if the rumors about me were true, so he decided to join the business meeting with me. At first he was skeptical, but as we worked together, he fell in love with my strong character and way of life. He felt that I was the only one for him. When I heard that he was determined to make me fall for him, I thought it was cute, like something a high schooler would do. As for me, I had been smitten from the very beginning. You see, Bob had such striking features and was incredibly popular among women. Embarrassingly, Bob was just my type, so I had a secret crush on him. We were business partners, so I kept a certain distance. However, after Bob asked me out on numerous dates, we dated for a year and then got married. Our married life was smooth, and every day was blissful. Every morning, while I was preparing breakfast, Bob would wake up with a gentle look on his face and say, "Good morning," and give me a warm hug. It became our daily routine. Despite being older, his childlike behavior always brought out my maternal instincts. Furthermore, Bob and I have never had an argument. And why would we? Bob never gets angry. When I accidentally broke a plate he cherished. He was more concerned about me than the plate. I always think about how kind he truly is. Both of us wanted a child, so after getting married, I decided to quit my job to focus on starting a family. Any child of Bob and me is bound to be adorable. I constantly thought about names, especially if it was a girl. Time flew by, and this year marks our 3rd anniversary. We haven't been blessed with a child, but we are still happy. Except for one thing. Bob's family. Home housed his mother and younger sister. His father passed away from cancer before we got married. His mother is always cheerful and has been very kind to me. I believe Bob's kindness comes from his mother. However, his sister was different. I really didn't like her. Thinking back, it started from the time I first introduced myself before we got married. My first impression of her was that she was a very charming person with striking features, just like Bob. I had briefly thought I wanted to get along with her, but that feeling vanished in the next instant. Nice to meet you. My name is Catherine. I'm here to say, who's this old lady? Is she my brother's wife's mother? Not only did she cut off my greeting, but the atmosphere went cold in an instant when my sister-in-law called me an old lady. My sister-in-law didn't greet me back, so Bob stepped in to introduce me. With a sarcastic tone and looking directly at me, she feigned surprise and asked, "How old are you?" I replied, 27. "No way, seriously? That's hilarious. I thought you were like 50. You really look old." That was way out of line. I genuinely doubted if this girl was Bob's sister. She blatantly stared at me from head to toe, sizing me up. I just watched her in silence until she furrowed her brow. Whether she disliked my face or my attitude, I couldn't tell, but she kept making snide remarks about my appearance. "Your clothes are so out of style, you're overweight, your nails are unkempt, and more." After a while, I just stared down at my own feet. Bob's hands trembled with rage, while his sister laughed continuously. Then Bob snapped, something he rarely does. "Hey, what the hell are you saying? That's extremely rude." She responded with, "What? You're so annoying." Totally killed the mood. She's just plain nasty. And she would make these same types of snide comments to Bob and their mother. They had put up with her behavior for years without expecting any change in her attitude. Both Bob and his mother apologized to me later. They weren't at fault, so why were they apologizing? I felt sorry for them, but at the same time, I harbored anger towards the sister-in-law for making such remarks to her own family. To minimize contact, I decided not to visit Bob's family home anymore. I heard about the sister-in-law through their mother, but she never caused any harm to us, so I went on living my life peacefully. Then one day, an incident shattered my happy daily life. "Catherine, Bob, I have a favor to ask. I'm planning to move to a senior housing facility with assistance in 6 months. Can I stay with you until then?" Bob's mother had injured her back. No surprise there. It's clear that the sister-in-law is to blame. Their mother already had a frail back and had trouble even carrying groceries. Yet the sister-in-law, who lived with her, wouldn't lift a finger to help, and would even make her mother carry her shopping bags. That's the level of her selfishness. It's inevitable that the mother's health would deteriorate. I just can't understand why the mother doesn't just kick her out of the house. Is it because she's her daughter? Maybe. No matter how bad the child is, a mother's love knows no bounds. I'm all for living with the mother, but only if it's just her. If we live with her, it means the sister-in-law comes with the package. Accepting it was the last thing I wanted, but I was concerned about the mother's health, so I felt I had no choice but to accept the sister-in-law moving in too. Just as I had expected, living together was hell. From morning to night, the sister-in-law would only spew venom, especially at me. When I cooked, she'd comment, "This tastes so bad. How can you even make such trash? You're weirdly talented." And then she'd ruthlessly throw the food in the trash. Whenever I folded her clothes, she would always find something to complain about. Sometimes she'd even say things like, "You need to iron this properly." Her attitude was like a rebellious teenager. In fact, she never even mentioned anything about how I folded clothes or ironed them. The sister-in-law has a habit of twisting words to fit her narrative. When cleaning the room, I have to be thorough, especially in the corners. Otherwise, the sharp-tongued comments from my sister-in-law start. "Hey, there's still dust over there. You know, you're pretty much the maid here, so do it right. You're so useless." Even though my sister-in-law doesn't lift a finger, she's quick to point out any flaws. I silently wonder when I'll escape this hell. As I continued cleaning, she added, "Poor Bob. You can't even manage household chores, so the least you can do is have a child. I wonder why you were even born a woman." "Excuse me? What's your problem?" I couldn't let that comment slide. I'd always held my tongue, but this was too much. But I didn't say anything more. Or rather, I couldn't. The look on my sister-in-law's face was terrifying, as if she was looking at something filthy. The pressure was so intense I couldn't help but look down. It was frightening. It was infuriating. All these feelings were swirling inside me, and all I could do was hold back the tears. Then my sister-in-law left the room. Laughing smugly, one day my sister-in-law came home in a great mood. When my mother-in-law asked why, my sister-in-law eagerly began to brag. Apparently her boyfriend had proposed. She boasted that he was tall, handsome, and earned a high income. She immediately approached me and brought up my inability to have children. While I was on top of the world, she mocked me for not fulfilling my role as a woman by having kids. It was shocking. She didn't have to say that in front of Bob and my mother-in-law. Bob got angry at my sister-in-law's comments, but she wouldn't listen. Suddenly I felt nauseous. With tears in my eyes, I rushed to the bathroom. From behind, I heard her say, "Pathetic!" But I felt so sick that I didn't care. From the living room, I could hear Bob and my sister-in-law arguing. My mother-in-law was beside me, patting my back, and said, "Children are a blessing. It's up to you and Bob to decide the pace." She comforted me with tears in her eyes. I wished from the bottom of my heart that my sister-in-law would get married and leave as soon as possible. On another day, after a routine visit to the OBGYN, I decided to take a detour on my way home. There was a popular flower shop nearby that was always bustling. I was thinking about buying some flowers when an old colleague, Steve, called out to me. Even though I had left my old job, Steve still looked up to me. We occasionally chatted through text, discussing work matters. It had been 3 years since we last met. We chatted for a bit and he told me he was going to marry his girlfriend soon. They had a date planned later that day. I was curious about why Steve was at the flower shop, but it soon became clear. Seeing Steve talk so happily about his girlfriend made me smile too. Realizing it was time to go, Steve picked out his flowers and went to pay. While waiting, I browsed the flowers, deciding which ones to buy. When Steve returned, he had 2 bouquets in his hands. He handed one to me as a gift. "This is for you. It's baby's breath." The flower's meaning is gratitude and happiness. "I've always been grateful for you, Catherine. Please continue to be there for me." Saying that, Steve headed towards the train station. Gratitude and happiness, huh? Never having chosen flowers based on their meaning, I thought Steve was a warm-hearted person. I hurried home, eager to tell my husband about today's events. When I got home, my sister-in-law wasn't there. It seemed she had gone out. I placed the baby's breath bouquet on the table and smiled, feeling grateful and happy. I placed the baby's breath in a vase and prepared dinner with my mother-in-law. It felt peaceful and joyful to have some time, just the 3 of us after so long. With my sister-in-law gone, my mother-in-law was watching her favorite TV show that starts every day at 7 p.m. That night, I told my husband about the day's happenings, and we both went to bed with smiles on our faces. The next day, my sister-in-law came home in the morning. She had a bouquet of roses in her hand, which she suddenly threw at me. She said, "Put these in a vase," and then went to her room. I tried to put the thrown bouquet into a vase, but most of the flowers were broken or the petals were torn, so they ended up in the trash. I wondered how roughly she had handled them. I began to feel sorry for my sister-in-law's boyfriend. On closer inspection, I recognized the wrapping of the bouquet. After changing into her house clothes, my sister-in-law started talking again. "Hey, I'm bringing my boyfriend over this Saturday. Make sure you dress decently, okay? Honestly, I wouldn't even want him to see you in your usual tacky outfits." Her words irked me, but the thought that my time with her would be short brought some relief. On the appointed day, Bob and I were out shopping because my sister-in-law had asked us to. My mother-in-law texted to say that my sister-in-law's fiancé had arrived in our absence. She probably didn't want me to meet her fiancé. When we returned, the living room was bustling. When I went to greet them, my sister-in-law glared at me. I accidentally made eye contact with the fiancé. After a brief mutual gaze, my sister-in-law, seemingly disliking it, said, "Don't just stand there. The tea's gotten cold, go get a fresh one." Her fiancé tried to help, but she stopped him. My mother-in-law mentioned the beautiful roses and baby's breath in the vase, to which my sister-in-law made a snide remark. "Why is your flower and the one I got from my boyfriend in the same vase?" "Awful. Separate them or throw them out. Your flower is colorless and not cute at all." She took the baby's breath from the vase and dropped it onto the floor. As I served the refreshed tea and placed the baby's breath in another vase, my sister-in-law's taunts continued. Apparently annoyed by my silence, she deliberately spilled the tea I had poured, staining the floor. The floor we had just cleaned with my mother-in-law that morning was now stained brown. From my viewpoint, I could see my sister-in-law's nervous fidgeting. She looked quite agitated. Bob brought a cloth and helped me wipe the floor. "Bob, you don't have to get dirty for her. Come on, let's sit and chat." The atmosphere was tense. Did my sister-in-law not realize that her words were backfiring on her? Her fiancé, who had been observing the situation, tried to defend me with his words. But, of course, my sister-in-law wasn't having any of it. "Why are you defending her? You should only be looking at me," she exclaimed, past the point of no return. "Isn't she your sister?" her fiancé asked, seeking clarification. In response, my sister-in-law uttered her usual demeaning phrase. "No, she's just the maid here, so it's okay." My mother-in-law tried to silence my sister-in-law, but as expected, it was to no avail. She just went on and on with her usual nasty comments. Once she was done ranting with a satisfied look on her face, her fiancé looked straight at her and said, "Let's break up." "What?" Steve was livid. No wonder, after all, he was Steve. I kinda guessed that my sister-in-law was engaged to Steve. The bouquet of roses my sister-in-law brought home was the same one Steve had bought just the other day. Catherine is a senior colleague at my workplace, someone I respect and who is kinder than anyone else. And about that baby's breath flower you said wasn't cute, I sent it to Catherine. Sorry for my bad taste. Wait a minute, I had no idea you two worked together. My gleeful sister-in-law began to panic. "Just because you didn't know, you think you can mock him? I've always heard about you being so mean, but Catherine isn't like that." Steve's gaze was cold. My mother-in-law looked down, while my husband stood by my side, glaring at my sister-in-law. Everyone in the room looked utterly disappointed in my sister-in-law. Seeing this, my sister-in-law looked at me with wide eyes, begging for support. "This isn't a joke, right? Tell me it's not." She pulled on my collar so hard it stretched my shirt. I firmly shook off my sister-in-law's hand. "I've always put up with your snide remarks. After all you've done, don't come to me for help now." For the first time, I laid bare my emotions towards my sister-in-law. "You gotta be kidding me. You can't do anything, right? You can't even have kids. You're finished as a woman." As my sister-in-law tried to slap me, Bob stepped in and grabbed her hand. Bob, who had remained silent until now, grabbed a cup of tea and poured it over my sister-in-law's head in anger. He then shouted at her in a low, booming voice. Bob began to recount the truth about our struggles to conceive. It wasn't me who couldn't have children, it was Bob himself. Bob had male infertility. After diligent treatment, it was cured, and now I was carrying our baby. Furious at my sister-in-law's comment, Bob shouted at her to apologize immediately. Seeing her brother truly angry for the first time, my sister-in-law was so startled she fell on her butt. "What's going on? Mom, you're on my side, right?" My sister-in-law tightly grasped my mother-in-law's hand, clinging to her leg in a comical manner. But she was shrugged off. "I'm done with you. I've let a lot slide because you're my daughter, but I've reached my limit. Leave this house now. You're the worst daughter. You ungrateful brat." My sister-in-law, thinking her mother was her last ally, was abandoned by even her. Clearly, even she was taken aback by this. She ran to her room crying. Steve said he would contact us later and left the house. My mother-in-law hugged me and said, "You endured so much, you did well," while patting my head. My mother-in-law, hearing for the first time that I was pregnant, cried with a smile, saying, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Congratulations." Bob apologized for not protecting me properly. It was a tumultuous few minutes, but I felt refreshed having finally expressed my feelings to my sister-in-law. I'll never forget what happened today. Later, my mother-in-law moved to a senior living community, and the family home was sold. Bob and I decided to move closer to my mother-in-law. We wanted her to watch our child grow up. I haven't heard anything about my sister-in-law since. After that, Bob dragged his reclusive sister out of the room and forcefully threw her out of the house, belongings and all. No one has been in touch with the sister-in-law, so nobody knows where she is or what she's up to. I got a message from Steve via text that he had sent a letter and some flowers. A bouquet of baby's breath had just arrived in the mail. I put the bouquet of baby's breath into a vase and started reading the letter. Catherine, I'm so sorry for my late response. How have you been feeling? Congratulations on your pregnancy. It was such unexpected happy news that it even made me happy. The letter went on to discuss his relationship with the sister-in-law after that incident. It seems that Steve and the sister-in-law had met once after the event. This was because it later came to light that the sister-in-law had been two-timing. Steve found out when the other man she was seeing contacted him. Since then he's cut ties and they're no longer in touch. If they had gotten married, he would have surely regretted it. The letter was filled with his gratitude. I should be the one thanking Steve, but he really is a sincere young man. I truly hope he finds happiness. The end of my sister-in-law, who bullied me relentlessly, was unexpected. Through these events, I realized how one's actions, good or bad, can come back to oneself based on how you treat others. I hope my child will be filled with compassion and understanding. It's thanks to me that you're alive, you parasite. If you have a problem, then divorce me and get out. In John's eyes, the kindness that was evident when we first met was now gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. The glasses he wore and the tie around his neck looked rather expensive, making it clear just how self-centered John had become just from his appearance and behavior. Fine, I'll leave. I said that, packed my things and left immediately, and I vowed to retaliate against John. My name is Linda. I work as an administrative assistant in a company and live with my mother. Although I may seem pretty ordinary, there's one thing about me that sets me apart from everyone else. I use a wheelchair. In fact, due to a traffic accident I had in my student days, I have to live my life in a wheelchair, even though I wasn't fatally injured. When I first started using a wheelchair, there was a lot I had to get used to, and it was quite challenging. But, you know, people are resilient, and once you've spent enough time in a wheelchair, you get the hang of it. Sometimes I wonder if this is what people would call a silver lining in a cloud. To be able to think that way probably means I've come to a good place mentally. But just going to work and coming back home isn't enough to make life fulfilling. So my favorite pastime was going to the local library in town to read. I've loved books since I was a kid, and even now as an adult, I'm still a bookworm. And that day too, I was at the library. But on that day, there was a medium-sized rock at the entrance for some reason, and I had trouble getting past it. The one who helped me was John. With his help, I was able to enter the library without a hitch. From then on, I often saw John at the library, and eventually we started dating and finally got married. And so I began living with John. But after a while, John made a surprising proposal. Linda, I want you to take good care of our home, and I want you to be my rock. So I'd like you to be a stay-at-home wife. Please. Wait, a stay-at-home wife? John suddenly pleaded with me to become a stay-at-home wife. But to be honest, I really didn't want to quit my job. But John kept asking me over and over to be a stay-at-home wife, so in the end I gave in. My colleagues never expected me to resign and tried hard to convince me to stay. But at the time, I prioritized my husband's wish over everything. In fact, just the act of telling the company that I wanted to resign was exhausting. And by the time I did resign, I was mentally drained. Since I quit my job, life has felt dull and uninteresting. Out of boredom, I called my old college friend Alicia to vent, but she was quite critical of my feelings. In this day and age where both men and women usually work, husbands who ask their working wives to become stay-at-home wives are rare. Linda, you're blessed, and you should be more grateful for your current situation. Alicia, unlike me, always talks about wanting to quit her job. It was clear that we had contrasting views. I had hoped Alicia might at least pretend to empathize with my frustrations, but she completely shut me down, leaving me feeling lonely. Plus, the allowance John gives me for household expenses, is minimal, and I've had to be very frugal. When it wasn't enough, I had to dip into the savings I had accumulated when I was working full-time. Because of that, I was determined to not overspend and started cutting back significantly on my beauty expenses. Still, my savings were dwindling. Watching the balance decrease became a sad daily ritual, leaving me in a sour mood. But I found it hard to voice these concerns to my hardworking family, so I kept silent. So without my fulfilling job and having to skimp on beauty expenses, the only joy left in my life was borrowing books from the library. Libraries are great, right? Being able to borrow books for free is awesome. At that time, I was more focused on saving money, and the joy of reading was overshadowed by the fact that I was borrowing books for free. It was a bit of a shock to realize how having less money could change one's perspective so much. Nowadays, with streaming services, you can listen to music for free, and there are definitely more free entertainment options than a few years ago. But no matter how many free entertainment options there are, the reality of having less money still brings down your spirits. Even in such a situation, I still loved John. I didn't want to bring up anything with John that could lead to an argument, even if it meant distancing myself from him. For that reason, I never told John about the lack of household allowance. Instead, I silently endured, escaping reality by immersively reading books while listening to free music. However, after a while, John started coming home late more frequently. Concerned, I asked John, "You've been coming home late recently. Is something wrong?" To which John replied, "Work's been busy, and I've been doing overtime. Sorry for making you worry. Honestly, in this modern age where overtime is becoming rare, I wondered if he could really be working late so often." But given that I was relying on him for our living expenses, I found it hard to question him further and let the matter slide. But one day John unexpectedly stayed out overnight. Feeling suspicious, I checked John's phone while he was in the shower. To my dismay, it was full of evidence that John had been cheating on me. Moreover, it seemed that the woman he was seeing had been in a relationship with him, even before we got married. Even after finding undeniable proof, I didn't have the courage to confront John about his infidelity. I guess back then I was still in love with him, and couldn't muster the strength. However, I was hurt by his betrayal, and saved the evidence of his affair on my phone. The revelation of John's cheating devastated me. On top of that, there was no sign of him increasing the allowance he gave me. Even though we were married, I wondered why I was the only one enduring such misery. Overthinking the situation gave me migraines, adding to my worries. Life felt so terrible. Yet every morning I had to prepare breakfast and lunch for John. By that time I had grown weary of making meals for him, wondering why I even had to cater to such a man, often sighing in frustration. John seemed oblivious to how I felt, quietly eating his breakfast and heading off to work with his packed lunch. He's probably going to come home late again, I thought, sighing once more. But surprisingly, John came home early that day and dined with me. However, he began criticizing me, saying, "The dinner today tastes off and you're my wife, you should try to look prettier." Looking back, John might have been having dinner at his mistress's house, which could have been why he was coming home late. So, without realizing it, he might have been comparing me to his mistress, which is probably why he made such comments to me. I finally lost my temper and shouted at him. After all the effort I put into making dinner, all he did was complain. Plus, I know about his affair. The reason I can't always look my best is that he barely gives me enough money to get by. I've been using up my savings from when I was single, because what he gives isn't enough. I was better off when I was working and single. John, realizing that I knew of his affair, impulsively picked up a vase nearby and splashed its water at me. I was trembling, both with rage and fear from his unexpected behavior. John, seeming completely unapologetic, said, "You're just a leech living off me. If you've got a problem, divorce me and leave." His eyes, once filled with kindness when we first met, now appeared cold and distant. Looking closer, I could tell that even the glasses and tie John was wearing seemed expensive. Just by his appearance and behavior alone, it was clear how self-centered he was. "Well, I'm leaving," I said, quickly packed my things and left right away. And I swore to myself that I would get back at John. Although John clearly saw me leave the house, he made no move to stop me. In fact, he had an expression that almost seemed grateful I was going. I was shocked by how much John had changed. It chilled my heart to realize how quickly love can fade, even after we had been so in love when we got married. I think I was probably crying at that moment. By the time the taxi I caught reached my parents' home, my tears had stopped, but the emptiness remained. My mother greeted me with surprise, but warmth. "What happened?" she asked. "Come on inside." "Thank you, Mom. It's okay, honey. We're family, it's what we do." "Yeah, thank you so much." The moment my mother hugged me, I started crying again. I thought my love for John had long since faded, yet I still found myself crying over him. Maybe deep down I didn't want to leave John and was shocked by our separation. Yep. With so many emotions swirling inside me, my mother held me close, never letting go. Wrapped in my mother's love, I felt alive again, and an overwhelming sense of happiness. "Something must have really hurt you," my mother said, stroking my head just like she used to when I was little. We went inside, and my mother tried to distract me with some funny TV shows and offered me some oranges she had gotten from a neighbor. By the time I had finished the oranges, the TV show that came on was a comedy show that John and I used to watch together. It was a simple show where a humorous host chatted with comedians and celebrities. We really loved it. I was just silently watching that show, but I must have had a somber look on my face. Seeing me like that, my mother must have become worried and asked, "Linda, did something happen with John?" "There's been a lot, Mom. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin." "Oh, I see. It's okay, Linda. Take your time and tell me at your own pace, okay?" "Yeah, I'll do that." With that, I told my mother everything that had happened. After listening to my entire story, my mother was livid. "I can't believe someone would make my Linda feel this way," she said. "You can stay here as long as you want and relax. It must have been hard on you." "Thanks, Mom. So, you're close with John's mom since you both went to the same school. Could you maybe mention what John did to me?" "Got it. I'll talk to her the next time we see each other." "Leave it to me." Thanks to my mother talking to my mother-in-law, John got into big trouble. I had a missed call from John on my phone. When I called back, John shouted angrily, "Hey, what's going on? The allowance I was getting from my parents suddenly stopped, and it's causing me problems. You had something to do with it, didn't you?" Apparently, John had some debts from gambling, and he'd been using about 70% of his salary and the entire allowance from his parents to pay it off. Due to the sudden stop in his allowance, he was clearly panicking. Though it was due to my mother's interference that John's allowance was cut off, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I played dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm busy. Bye." With that, I hung up. I felt a bit relieved knowing John was facing this predicament, but I wasn't completely at peace. The resentment I had towards John kept building up, and my stress had solidified over time. Just a little revenge wasn't going to be enough to ease it. And the thing is, when people have too much time on their hands, they tend to obsess over petty things. Of course, I was no exception. As days went by, my grudge against John only deepened, and there wasn't much I could do about it. I could have vented to my mother, but I felt bad complaining about the same thing repeatedly, and I already knew her response would be predictable. So I decided to reach out to my old friend Alicia. Alicia responded immediately, and I could tell she was doing well. "I've got something to tell you. Want to grab a coffee sometime?" I suggested, and Alicia agreed enthusiastically. As the day approached to meet Alicia, I felt excited. It made me realize how much I enjoy social interactions. Just thinking about what to wear was exhilarating. On the day of our meetup, Alicia and I met up and went to a nearby cafe. There, I told Alicia everything about what John had done in the current situation. "I see, that sounds tough." "Yeah, and John would give me so little for household expenses, but he always bought expensive stuff for himself. His glasses had all these fine details and embellishments, and his tie was made of what seemed to be expensive fabric with beautiful red and blue stripes." As I described the unique features of John's belongings, Alicia seemed to recall something and went silent for a moment. After taking a deep breath, she asked me, "Hey Linda, can you tell me your husband's name? I feel like I might know him." "Oh really? You know him? His name is John Martinez." "I do know him." "Wow, John Martinez is my boss. I really don't like him. He's so annoying and nitpicky, and his instructions at work are hard to understand." I had no idea. "But how did you figure it out?" "Well, I happened to remember my boss wearing a distinctive tie that looked expensive. So, when you mentioned a similar tie, I just thought maybe, and bingo! I was shocked." "I see. So, can you spread the word at the company about how messed up John is?" "That sounds good. If all goes well, he might quit, and you can get back at him." "I'd be happy to help." And so Alicia began to spread rumors about John being an unreliable husband at the office. Gradually, the news spread throughout the company. By that time, John felt like he was walking on eggshells, finding it difficult to be at work. After a while, I started receiving emails from him. The emails were about how he felt uncomfortable at the office and didn't know what to do. For my part, I felt like shouting at John, "Why should I care? If you hadn't done what you did to me, none of this would have happened. It's all your own doing." But I didn't want anything to do with John, so I ignored the emails. However, it's strange how men act. The moment a woman stops chasing after them, they start chasing the woman. I've read about this phenomenon in many relationship advice books, but I never thought it would actually happen to me. Probably because I had been ignoring John's emails, I received another email from him. After some thought, I realized that I need you, Linda. I want to discuss our future and try to start over. Please, can we meet? I could feel the desperation in John's message, and by the time I finished reading, I was completely drained. Even a single email from John could ruin the good mood my mother and Alicia had set for me. Such power he had. Now, how to deal with this email? I did think about ignoring it again, but on second thought, John and I are technically still married. Honestly, I wished I could erase the fact that I registered our marriage with someone who brings me down. I even wanted to divorce him right away. So, thanks to John's email, I finally made up my mind to get a divorce. I acted swiftly. "Alright, if we involve our parents in the discussion, I'm okay with meeting you." And that's how I responded to John immediately. Soon after, I received a reply from John, and I was able to get his approval. I bet John probably thinks that, because I'm seriously considering our future together, that's why I've said I want to discuss things involving both our families. Considering our future together, that's why I've said I want to discuss things involving both our families. He's likely in La La Land, completely misunderstanding the situation. As for me, I was in the middle of a triumphant pose, having successfully led John to that mistaken belief. I had been strategizing with my mother about how we'd teach John a lesson, and my mother had shared the plan with my mother-in-law. Then, surprisingly, my father-in-law also decided to join our strategy. It seemed that my mother-in-law and father-in-law were appalled at John's irresponsibility and bad character. They no longer saw him as their son. That's probably why they sided with me in this situation. So, with everyone except John, we kept discussing and refining our plan. On the day of the confrontation, my mother and I headed to the house where John lived. Upon arrival, John greeted us with a smile, but I felt a chill. Already in the living room were my mother-in-law and father-in-law. When everyone had gathered, John began to speak. "Linda, would you live with me in this house again?" I calmly responded and began laying out the lawyer's business card and various pieces of evidence of his affairs on the table. Seeing this, John paled as my mother-in-law and father-in-law started berating him. "How could you, as a man, let Linda go through all that? I never thought you'd turn out to be such a loser. We're done with you? Really, I don't want to see your face anymore, John. Linda, you can always rely on me. Okay." With that, John was berated by his parents, got a firm disownment, and in the end it was settled that he would divorce me. "Tell me it's a lie. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. Please everyone, forgive me." John's pitiful voice echoed throughout the living room. Afterwards, my divorce from John went through smoothly, and a little later when I informed Alicia about it, she said she had some news too. Given the cheeriness in Alicia's voice, I thought maybe she was going to get married, but that wasn't the case. Turns out, Alicia joyfully informed me that John had quit his job. According to Alicia's story, after John and I divorced, he felt increasingly uncomfortable at work and eventually chose to resign voluntarily. Well, I'm just glad I don't have to deal with that annoying boss nitpicking or taking those lousy job instructions anymore. Really, it feels like a "thanks for letting me go" moment. Alicia's carefree voice came over the phone. As for me, hearing about John's voluntary resignation, I felt a mix of happiness and emptiness. I didn't like John anymore, but he was once someone I loved. The fact that he left his job because of our issues weighed on me a bit. But John not only subjected me to financial abuse, but also cheated on me. Maybe it was some kind of divine retribution. At least, that's how I tried to see it. Plus, John divided the property appropriately. Rumor has it that John is working day and night to pay off his debts and cover his living expenses. It seems like fitting punishment for him, if you ask me. As for myself, I've been living with my mother as usual. But I realized I couldn't keep doing that forever, so I started working as a full-time office worker again. Having had experience in administrative roles, I got hired. Quickly, my company regards me as an immediate asset, and they rely on me. Contrary to popular belief, office work can be pretty intricate when you get into the details. We administrative staff need to communicate well, teach each other, and sometimes cover for someone on maternity leave. Teamwork is essential. Working like this, naturally I became close with my coworkers. That's why I really enjoy my job. Even when I come home tired, my mother, unchanged from those days, warmly welcomes me and has dinner ready. Having dinner with my mother, we chat about what happened at work today or engage in some lighthearted banter. I truly enjoy these moments. Frankly, my married life with John lacked these warm moments. It was pretty bland, so I cherish this happiness every day, living joyfully with my mother. I can't thank you enough to my mother. And then, finally, Bob said the worst possible thing. From next month, clear out your room. When my mother gets discharged from the hospital, I'm gonna bring her straight to this house. Living together might make household chores easier, but I'll have to face my mother-in-law and endure her snide comments every single day. I was utterly devastated. I understand. He seems hell-bent on making this happen with his mother. Rather than arguing with him, it's better to discreetly take measures. I've learned that, from years of experience. Bob left not suspecting a thing and seemed quite pleased. Everything is going according to my plan. It's so simple it's laughable. A few hours later, after tidying up and taking a break, my phone rang loudly. It was a frantic call from Bob. Hey, what the heck? The house is empty. I am Catherine Rose, a 45-year-old working mother, and hold a managerial position at a publishing company. I have a husband and 2 kids. A typical American family. When I got married, the idea of balancing work and family was just beginning to gain traction. It was an era when it was common for women to marry and become homemakers. Bob had allowed me to work. In return, I have given my all to both my job and household chores. After having kids, I've been fully committed to raising them as well. But lately, I have been feeling overwhelmed. My mother-in-law, Mary, who was initially against me working, has started to complain recently. When are you gonna stop this job nonsense? Leaving your husband like that, you're such a terrible wife. Back in our day, the job came second. Our main duty was to dedicate ourselves to our homes. I have been working hard in both my career and home, raising the kids, and managing household chores. I always thought of household chores as repaying the kindness Bob showed by supporting my career. Perhaps, seeing my dedication, both my daughter and son help around the house. My daughter does the laundry and ironing, while my son takes care of the bath and fills the tub every day. When I come home, I just have to prepare the meal and clean up. I'm so grateful to my kids, but even though we're both working, Bob doesn't lift a finger. I've asked him to help out several times, but his answer is always the same. Catherine, I let you keep working, didn't I? You're trying to skip out on your wife duties and make me do the chores because you want to have an easy life? Quit playing the victim. And every time, my mother-in-law would tattle on me, and I'd get an earful from her. Bob's the breadwinner of the family, you know? And you're trying to make him do household chores? What are you thinking, Mary? This is why it's never good for a woman to work. Be grateful I even let you work. understand your place. Lately, perhaps she's bored, but almost every night she calls with these snide remarks. It's become so frequent and unbearable that both my kids and I are fed up. My kids have even started pretending they are needed somewhere else to hang up the phone. Sure, I'm grateful they let me continue working, but why all this hostility? I've been the one handling both the household chores and raising the kids. She should know how hard it is to juggle both roles. What more does she want from me? Right now I'm under so much stress. The only saving grace is that my kids are on my side. The root cause of this is Bob's salary. Truth be told, Bob's pay isn't that great. It would probably be considered on the lower end. He had a tough time finding a job, and eventually landed one at a small company thanks to a family connection. If he had shown some initiative, I wouldn't have cared about the low salary and would have supported him wholeheartedly. But Bob got down on himself because of the way he got the job. In the beginning, he used to mutter things like this. He only ever did the work given to him, never striving for promotions or looking for new job opportunities. Someone truly capable would have studied on the side or honed their skills to find better job opportunities. But Bob didn't, so he only ever got raises based on seniority. His performance-based bonuses were always the bare minimum. On the other hand, the company I work for is a nationwide corporation that had parental leave policies in place early on. It felt the effects of the economic bubble, but it's a reputable company that's managed to avoid major salary cuts. What's more, I've climbed up to the position of manager. I've successfully handled a significant number of contracts and projects. Naturally, I earn considerably more than Bob. I'm even covering our kids' expenses, using my paycheck to set aside money for their college funds. I've taken full advantage of the benefits of working for a large corporation. Looking back, I feel like I was living off my savings when I took parental leave for my 2 children and had no salary. With Bob's salary, there's no way he could cover all the living expenses with 2 kids. I don't recall ever receiving living expenses from Bob, and there's no record of any transfers. Maybe Bob let me continue working because he thought he could rely on my earnings. Lately, I've been thinking about this a lot. Ever since we got married, I've started to wonder if we've mostly been living on my salary. To confirm this suspicion, I looked at my bank book. The rent, utilities, groceries, and the kids' school fees, I've been paying for all of it. There's not a single penny coming in from Bob's account. Eventually, I just laughed it off, feeling drained. Bob's salary is all gone, spent on his hobbies and giving pocket money to my mother-in-law. I've always thought that I owed Bob for letting me continue working. That's why I've been trying so hard with the household chores and childcare. But look at the situation now. I'm covering all the living expenses, while Bob spends his salary freely without saving a dime. When it comes to supporting our lives, wouldn't you say I'm the main breadwinner? Having me cover the living expenses while Bob does whatever he pleases, I'd say I've repaid the favor of letting me work. Yet Bob's catchphrase is, "I'm the one supporting y'all. If you've got a problem, just leave." What's he thinking, claiming he's the one supporting us? Is he thinking he's covering the living expenses while freely spending his own salary? It's a total mystery, and I just can't understand. If I, who's paying for everything, were to leave with the kids, what would happen? Or if I threw this bank book at him and told him to leave, would Bob just quietly go? But sticking to his claim that he's the main breadwinner, he'd probably tattle to my mother-in-law. I wonder if my mother-in-law knows about the difference in our salaries. No, if she knew, she probably wouldn't make those snide remarks. She must think he's a wonderful son, supporting his family and even allowing his wife to work. If she knew about the difference in our salaries, what would she think? Would she ditch Bob and cozy up to me? Nah, that's the last thing I'd want. If Bob and I were to part ways, I wonder what would become of him and my mother-in-law. What would they do? Tired of the snide remarks from my mother-in-law, I often find myself pondering these thoughts. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law hadn't. My mother-in-law had an accident at her home and hurt her foot. It seems she's going to need hospitalization and physical therapy for a while. My father-in-law passed away before Bob and I got married, so my mother-in-law has been living alone. So either Bob or I have to take care of my mother-in-law. Are you really going to leave me all by myself when I'm in such a state? Come to the hospital ASAP. My foot hurts so bad I can't move, and I've got a ton of things I need done. I quickly received a call from the hospital about my mother-in-law. The moment I answered, she started with her demands, wanting this and that. I was at work, and whenever I tried to mention it, my mother-in-law would just lash out. I'm swamped with work, so I decided to let Bob handle her. Honestly, being criticized by my mother-in-law for working is a huge stressor. Right now, it's best if Bob visits the hospital to cheer up my mother-in-law. When I asked Bob to care for my mother-in-law, he immediately began to complain. Hey Catherine, why aren't you looking after Mom? I'm working too, you know? Despite being his mother, he just tosses all the caregiving responsibilities to his wife. Wouldn't one think to at least visit her once or twice on their own? Holding back my frustration, I replied, I have work too, Bob. Plus, all the chores at home? If you'd help around the house, maybe I could visit her. More importantly, I think your mom would be happier if it was you who came to care for her. This is true, though some may vent their stress by snapping at their daughter-in-law. When one is immobile, it's better to think and talk positively. So I kept finding reasons to avoid caring for my mother-in-law. Instead, I would neatly wash and fold my mother-in-law's laundry and pack it in a bag. If my mother-in-law asked for something specific, I'd buy it after checking the name of the products she requested. Even if Bob took credit for those things and I got the blame, I didn't mind. I just didn't want to hear my mother-in-law's snide remarks. Thankfully, it seems my judgment was right. My mother-in-law greets Bob with a big smile every day. Apparently, for a mother like my mother-in-law, nothing beats the joy of being cherished by her son. Having her beloved son around must feel much better than dealing with a daughter-in-law she would want to make sarcastic comments about. Every day, it seems like she waits for Bob to come home from work. She must be really focused on chatting with Bob. She even hands Bob a shopping list note, and she hasn't called me since the first time she was admitted to the hospital. Seeing my mother-in-law's smiling face, Bob probably feels he's being a good son. Even after he gets home, he's in a good mood. At night, when Bob returns, he simply hands me the laundry. The laundry and shopping notes were handed to me without any complaints. When I handed over my mother-in-law's belongings, Bob made some sarcastic remarks, but I was still able to live peacefully. Honestly, I just don't want to hear any of my mother-in-law's complaints right now. That's what I murmured to myself in the middle of the night. It would be nice if things could stay peaceful for a while, but injuries take a toll at my mother-in-law's age. Through Bob, I pushed hard for her rehabilitation, but my mother-in-law, delighted with her son's visits, tended to skip it. As a result, by the time her injury healed, her legs had become weak. Bob would visit her in the evening after work, but my mother-in-law would skip her daytime rehab, just waiting in her room for Bob's visit. And after experiencing her son's care, my mother-in-law started making all sorts of requests from Bob. She rarely calls on me directly, but when it comes to things like laundry, I'm the one who actually does it. Running errands, doing laundry, and even bringing her snacks became a daily routine. All she did was sit in her hospital room and chat cheerfully with her son, while I did the housework. It was a relief not to see my mother-in-law, but I was worn out. Her requests were many, and shopping alone was a significant chore. I understand that hospitals can be boring, but why does she want so much stuff? If her legs have become weak, living alone surely becomes inconvenient. It seems my mother-in-law realized that too. Then she made a shocking request to Bob. My legs aren't moving well anymore. Shopping and preparing meals have become so difficult. Bob, please don't leave me alone. Of course, Bob sided with my mother-in-law. Right, maybe we should live together. It might be easier for Catherine to take care of you. The two of them were moving in the direction of living together, without consulting me. And then Bob broke the worst news to me. I'm gonna be living with my mother, starting next month. Clear out your room? When she gets out of the hospital, I'll bring her straight here. From the perspective of efficiency in doing house chores, it's certainly easier for my mother-in-law to live with us. As for me, I'll have to see my mother-in-law every day and get nagged at each time. My feelings were extremely downcast. Bob acted like it was already a done deal that we'd all live together. I understand, I replied with little energy. Bob seemed determined to force this co-living situation, no matter the despair I felt. It might be better to secretly make plans rather than argue about it now. I knew this from years of experience. While Bob and my mother-in-law happily planned for the move, I constantly thought about how I could escape. I have my own room where I gather and review work materials. There are many books and files in that room. Whether you call it a study or an office, it's essential for me. Bob wants me to give it up. Without this room, my work would be impacted. I might have to come home even later than I do now. I muttered to myself while staring at the bookshelf. Where should I move all these books and documents? I can't leave them at home if we live with my mother-in-law. They're too important to risk getting thrown away or damaged. It may sound like something out of a TV drama, but I really fear she might throw them out. Especially since she'll probably target what she knows is important to me. And if I dare complain, she'll feign ignorance and run to Bob for support. She didn't know they were important, Bob. Catherine's mad even though it was an accident. Help! There'll be no peace for me in this house once we start living together. I can see her bossing me around and making snide remarks about my work, wearing me out. What should I do? Hey, if my mother-in-law is coming to this house, I had a sudden realization. Why hadn't I thought of this simple solution before? It seems living with my mother-in-law and all her nagging wore me down more than I realized. It felt like the fog before my eyes was gradually clearing up. Well, of course, there's absolutely no need for me to hold back. Why didn't I realize something so simple? I mumbled to myself and immediately began making preparations. And as the month changed, the day of my mother-in-law's discharge from the hospital arrived. Bob was all excited, having taken the day off from the start of the morning. Hey, you better take proper care of my mom from now on. Don't think I'm gonna step in like I did when she was in the hospital, he said in a commanding tone. Without responding to Bob's order, I changed the subject. Oh, speaking of which, here? Your mom's been in the hospital for quite a while, right? Hospital food is bland, and they don't give you much. I bet a gourmet like her wasn't satisfied. I think the discharge process and packing will take up the morning, so why don't you take her out for some good food? You took the day off after all. How about a nice drive, just the two of you? I think she'd really appreciate it. I handed Bob a generous amount of cash. I had set aside some money for living expenses and even Bob's personal spending, but this was more than his monthly allowance. Surprised by the unexpected bonus, Bob's spirits lifted even higher. Well, aren't you thoughtful? Alright, I'll use this money and go for a drive with my mom. I'll give you a call when we decide about dinner. Make sure the house is in tip-top shape. The house was in perfect shape for my mom, right? Without any suspicion, Bob happily left. Everything was going according to plan. It was almost too easy. I couldn't help but laugh. This should give me some time. I'm looking forward to when Bob and my mother-in-law return. With that, I continued tidying up the house. I had to finish cleaning before Bob and my mother-in-law came back. A few hours later, just as I was taking a break after finishing up, my cell phone began ringing loudly. The call came in a flustered tone from Bob. Hey, what's going on? The house is empty. That's right, after Bob went to pick up my mother-in-law, I moved all our stuff to the new house we just rented. Of course, I left some of Bob's personal belongings in a bed for my mother-in-law in the room. Oh, you're back already? You told me to clear out the room, so I emptied both the room and the living room for Mom to feel comfortable. From now on, please enjoy your time with her. I responded nonchalantly, which only infuriated Bob. You gotta be kidding me. The living room and kitchen are completely empty. After all I've done to support this family, how could you? There it was, his go-to line. He seemed to believe that saying this put him in a superior position. How naive. No, Bob, I've been the one supporting the family. Including you. Weren't you spending your paycheck on pocket money for your mom and your own hobbies? And yet, you demand an allowance from the family budget. How does that make you the breadwinner? Bob seemed surprised by my resistance, but he retorted nonetheless. His argument, however, was nonsensical. Shut it! I'm the man here. I'm the head of this household. You as my wife should just do as I say. Now put everything back the way it was. No thanks. I bought all the furniture in the living room, and all the kitchenware, with my salary. The kids are with me, so don't worry. I also paid for the rent, utilities, and groceries of that house. So in reality, I'm the breadwinner. Why did you decide to live with your mom without consulting me? I can't live with someone so selfish. As you wished, you can be the main provider now. Live your life as you please. It seemed that Bob finally realized my intentions. Hold on, are you saying the rent for this place? I've paid up until the end of this month. But from next month, you'll need to handle it. I've also canceled all the automatic payments for electricity, gas, and the internet. So, good luck with that. Bob's words probably tipped her off to the situation. My mother-in-law also started making a racket in a loud voice. How could you do this, Catherine? Just because you have a job doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. Fine, Bob and I will live here in luxury. Oh, does my mother-in-law not know about Bob's earnings? I hope you can have that luxurious life. That is, if your son can afford it. Anyway, goodbye. Wait, Catherine, where are you right now? I didn't bother listening to the rest of Bob's rant. I hung up and blocked both Bob and my mother-in-law's numbers. The rest is probably as you'd imagine. With the meager salary from his uninspiring job at a small company, Bob was left with very little after paying the rent and utilities. Living in a needlessly spacious apartment where a family of 4 once lived, Bob and my mother-in-law would constantly bicker. What's with this meal? Can't you provide something better for your mother? Shut up. If you want something else, make it yourself. You're just making excuses, saying walking is too hard after slacking off on your rehab. You don't do anything at home, Mom. You're just wasting time. Having neglected her rehab, my mother-in-law's legs had become weak, and she refused to do any home workouts. Could my legs not move as I wanted, causing my frustration? She started imposing unreasonable demands on Bob, whom she had cherished so much. Maybe she's showing early signs of Alzheimer's. Even adding my mother-in-law's pension, it feels like they're living in poverty. They'd be better off if they moved to a smaller place fit for 2, but it seems Bob hasn't thought of that. He probably tried to contact me numerous times, but I've blocked all communication from both Bob and my mother-in-law since that incident. Of course, my kids did the same, blocking their numbers when we moved. Bob doesn't know our new address, and he can't ask for help. Their living situation will probably collapse soon. I was earning a decent income with the help of my children, so I managed to lease a nice apartment. Each of my kids has their own room. I secured a spacious room that doubles as a bedroom and workspace. The rent might be a tad high, but with Bob out of the picture, I'm saving more than enough. My kids, who were tired of being belittled by their father, are now living freely. They've become more helpful around the house. Helping out without being criticized by their father makes chores feel good, they say. Everywhere, isn't it normal to praise and thank kids when they help? I'm glad my children haven't become bitter. I was headed back to the apartment where my kids awaited. Later, through a lawyer, I served Bob with divorce papers. I lived on my salary, while he spent all his earnings solely on himself and my mother-in-law. That's a valid reason for divorce in my book. Bob tried to argue against the divorce with various points, but my lawyer cut him off every time. The fact that he claimed to be the breadwinner but didn't contribute was labeled as verbal abuse and clear financial abuse. If it went to court, Bob wouldn't stand a chance. I got custody of the kids, naturally. In exchange for not seeking alimony and child support, we agreed on no property division. After all, the savings we had for the kids' college were from my earnings. I couldn't let Bob and my mother-in-law take that. The car was in my name, and our house was rented. I'm grateful we didn't buy a house. Now, I can focus on my job without complaints. I want to support my kids in whatever they want to do. With the money saved for college and my future earnings, I should be able to cover their tuition. Alright, I'm gonna work hard today.